Hi there, this is John Wilkinson again from History Made Easier, with a presentation that contrasts an America that seemed close to revolution with one that was besotted with the silver screen. You'll see what I'm getting at. The crisis point for the Great Depression in America was reached in 1932, though it had been building. The Depression would not reach its depth until the following year, but it was the presidential election year when, for some, America actually seemed closest to revolution. And we can present two very different views of America in 1932. Unemployment at 12 million, that's almost a quarter of the working population, and a country close to revolution. And the view from Hollywood and the picture palace. That's the cinema to you and me. Remembering that 3 out of 4 Americans were still in work, even if they weren't sure that they would be tomorrow. But with Hoover's administration doing little to make the situation better for so many Americans, concern quickly turned to protest. And protests sometimes turned violent. In 1930, a rally of the unemployed in New York turned into a riot when police charged the crowd. And the photograph I show here is from a communist-led protest in New York in 1932. In places, farmers fought back too, and they are usually seen as very conservative people. They refused to let food into towns until they were paid enough for their crops. This involved blockading roads and stopping trains, and inevitably fights broke out. William Green, a moderate trade union leader, in an article in Times magazine published in October 1931, said, "No social order is secure where wealth flows at such a rate into the hands of the few away from the many. I warn the people who are exploiting the workers that they can only drive them so far before they will turn on them and destroy them. They are taking no account of the history of nations in which governments have been overturned. Revolution grows out of the depths of hunger." Add to this the words of the president of the Farmers Union of Wisconsin when he spoke to a Senate committee in 1932. "Farmers are just ready to do anything to get even with the situation. The farmer is a naturally conservative individual. See, I told you. But you cannot find a conservative farmer today. Any economic system that has in its power to set me and my wife in the streets at my age, what can I see but red?" In March 1932, some 5,000 unemployed marched on Henry Ford's car plant near Detroit. And 4 men were killed when the marchers clashed with security guards and police. But the biggest protest, one that set people directly against their government and brought the army onto the streets of the capital, was of course the Bonus March of 1932, which you will know all about, so I won't go into detail here. But Hoover called in the army to break up the camps of those who remained after the Senate rejected an early payment of the bonus. Tents were set on fire, and General MacArthur, in command of the troops, used cavalry with sabres drawn, infantry with fixed bayonets, and tear gas. There were even tanks on the streets. 2 babies died of tear gas, and many people, including children, were injured. Hoover publicly thanked God that America still knew how to deal with a mob. But most Americans saw it very differently. Yet there was another very different America to consider. 3 out of 4 Americans were still in work, and like never before, and perhaps never again, at least in quite the same way, the cinema for many, many Americans was pure escapism. It was a chance to turn your back on the otherwise ever-present fear of losing your job, the constant signs of a depression that seemed without end, the closed-down shops, the local bank closed, people begging on the streets, perhaps an old neighbour or work colleague. You might have to forget the idea of buying a house or a car, or even a new cooker or a fridge, for the foreseeable future at least. Things are far too uncertain, and you need to eke out some savings, just in case. And you certainly can't afford to risk going into debt. But you can still afford 25 cents each, that was the price of a loaf of bread then, to escape to the cinema. And so the cinema boomed. Throughout the Great Depression, 60 to 100 million Americans went to the cinema each week, almost half the population, though this included whole families, and some people went 2 or even 3 times a week. So, 2 very different Americas to consider. You know, one of the dangers in history, and in current affairs for that matter, is that the exceptional, and indeed the tragic, I do not want to detract from the misery the Depression brought on millions of Americans, can make us lose sight of what was actually the norm for the majority. Most Americans kept their jobs throughout the Depression. Something for you to think about, and I hope this presentation proves useful to you. Lots more detail in my ebooks on Amazon, of course, and the same kinds of analysis available in my tutorials. But if you're a regular to my presentations, you will already know that. But let me thank you so much for listening and wish you the best of luck with your studies. Cheers.